It started as a small attempt to feel safe. When Liam and I moved into our quiet suburban house north of Atlanta, I bought a doorbell camera, just a little piece of tech to ease my anxiety. The neighborhood was peaceful, but the house sat right on a corner lot, open and visible. I wanted eyes on that front door. For 2 months, the footage was boring kids, squirrels, Amazon deliveries. Nothing out of place. Then one afternoon in late September, I got a notification at work. Motion detected. The clip showed a delivery driver, dark hair, sunglasses, blue uniform. He placed a box neatly on our mat, then froze. 17 seconds of perfect stillness. His head tilted slightly upward toward our second-floor window, our bedroom. He wasn't checking a phone or the house number. He was looking. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was confused. But I saved the clip anyway, labeling it Anomaly M. A week later, it happened again. Same driver. Same eerie pause this time, 23 seconds, and he was staring straight into the camera. Not a quick glance, not curiosity. Just a blank, unwavering stare. Behind those cheap black lenses, I could feel him watching me. That was the first time real fear crept in. When I showed Liam, he just sighed. Maybe he's zoning out, he said. People have bad days. But there was something about that stillness, unnatural, intentional, that gnawed at me. Then came another clip. This time, the driver's hand slowly brushed his hip. Not fidgeting, not reaching for a scanner, feeling for something hidden. Then, a faint nod, and he walked away. That night, I told Liam again. He still thought I was overreacting. But the next clip changed everything. It was noon when the notification came. Same driver, different package. He placed it down, stared at the ground near the welcome mat, and began to count. His lips moved silently, deliberate. When I zoomed in, I saw it. A fresh, tiny scratch etched into the mortar beneath the mat. It was precise, deliberate, like a marker. The way he looked at it, the faint smirk when he turned to leave, I knew then he wasn't distracted. He was measuring something. That night, I showed Liam again, pulling the mat aside to reveal the scratch. It was exactly where I'd seen it in the footage, sharp, intentional. Liam bent down, unimpressed. Could be a rock, could be the sprinkler guys, he muttered. His calmness only made me feel more insane. I was the paranoid girlfriend now, talking about scratches and counting delivery men. But I couldn't shake the sense of being studied. Days passed in a haze of dread. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart spiked. Then one morning, the pattern escalated. Motion detected. I opened the live feed and froze. The same van. The same man. But no package. He was wearing black latex gloves. He knelt by the mat, ignoring the doorbell entirely. In one hand, he held a small metal ruler. In the other, a glass vial filled with faintly green liquid. My pulse pounded as I watched him measure the distance from the scratch to the doorframe. Then he pulled a piece of paper from his wrist, some kind of note, and carved a second line, 12 inches from the first. Next, he uncorked the vial and released 3 drops onto the first mark, then 3 onto the new one. The liquid soaked into the mortar like acid. He capped the vial, wiped the ruler clean, and walked away. The entire act lasted less than a minute. He wasn't a thief. He was a technician. That night, I sat shaking as Liam replayed the footage. His logic started to falter. Okay, he said quietly. That's weird. But what's he doing? Looks like pest control? Pest control? I snapped. Wearing an Amazon uniform and dropping chemicals into our bricks? He didn't answer. Neither of us could. Because there was no rational explanation for what we'd just seen. The police wouldn't help either. Liam called the non-emergency line, described a delivery driver leaving drops of liquid on our porch, and the officer actually chuckled. No break-in, no crime. They couldn't send anyone. By then, I was trapped in my own fear. The doorbell camera that once calmed me had become my window into something I couldn't unsee. I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. The next day, I called my friend Sarah, a fraud investigator who dealt with weird behavior for a living. I sent her every clip. 10 minutes later, she called back. Her voice was low. Alex, I showed it to a contact of mine, a former counter-surveillance expert. He knows what that liquid is. What is it? I asked. An enzime. Not toxic, but it's used as an accelerant, a marker, and a mild corrosive. The pattern fits something called alpha pheromone trace. She explained in chilling detail. The first scratch was a perimeter marker. The enzyme acted as a beacon used by professional burglars who employed trained animals to test for motion sensors and weak spots. The chemical's real purpose, though, was worse. It slowly softened mortar, making the door frame vulnerable to silent cutting. "He's not breaking in tonight," Sarah said. "He's preparing. Once that material weakens, he'll come back probably within 48 hours to finish the job." My blood went cold. This wasn't random. This was planned chemistry. That night, I didn't argue with Liam. I didn't show him another clip. I just looked at him and said, "I'm not sleeping in this house, not tonight. Trust me for one day. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it forever." I grabbed my keys, my bag, and my pistol, and left. Liam stayed behind, still trying to be rational. I checked into a hotel and pulled up the live feed, the glow of the laptop, the only light in the room. 10 minutes later, Liam called. "Alex, what are you doing? This is insane." "Go outside," I said. "Shine your flashlight on the marks. Tell me what you see." He sighed, humoring me. The doorbell cam showed his silhouette bending over the mat. "I see 2 greenish lines. Big deal." Then he stopped. "Wait, there are little white dots. Dozens. They're moving." "They're not bugs," I whispered. "They're drawn to the enzyme. It's part of the process. They're confirming the area is safe." "For what?" he stammered. "For whoever's coming next." "Liam, get out. Right now." He didn't argue. I watched him sprint to his car, headlights slicing across the camera view, before vanishing into the night. The porch was empty again, but the house wasn't safe anymore. I knew it. I kept the feed open, eyes fixed on that motionless doorway, waiting for the inevitable. At 4:15 a.m., the notification came. Motion detected. The man was back. At 4:15 a.m., my phone vibrated softly on the hotel nightstand. Motion detected at front door. I sat up instantly, the blue glow of my laptop painting the room in ghostly light. On the live feed, the same white van sat idle at the curb, engine off this time. The air outside looked frozen, still as death. Then he stepped into view. No uniform, no delivery. Just a man dressed in black from head to toe, balaclava tight around his face, gloves gleaming faintly under the porch light. He wasn't carrying a package now. He was carrying a compact demolition saw. The sight of it made my stomach twist. He moved with calm precision, like he'd done this 100 times before. Kneeling by the welcome mat, he pulled something from his jacket pocket, his ruler. Even in the dark, I could see the faint green shimmer of the enzyme lines on the mortar. He started cutting. The sound barely registered on the camera's mic, a muted whine, surgical in tone. The weakened mortar gave way like butter. Within 30 seconds, he had carved a perfect 6-inch square from the base of the doorframe. The square came loose in his hand, exposing the interior latch mechanism. Then he reached in. One twist, a click, and the front door eased open. The man straightened, the faint porch light catching the edge of his mask. For one terrible moment, he turned his head and looked straight into the camera. He knew I was watching. There was no emotion behind that stare, no rush, no fear, just total control. Then he stepped inside. The feed flickered, stuttered, and went black. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the frozen image of my front door ajar, the darkness yawning behind it. Then the screen went blank completely. Connection lost. I didn't scream at first. I couldn't. I just sat there, my heart thundering, my hands locked around the laptop like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Then the terror hit all at once. I called Liam, over and over. No answer. I dialed 911, voice shaking. "There's someone in my house. I have footage. Please, he's inside." It took them 13 minutes to arrive. By the time the police got there, the man was gone. The front door was closed, locked from the inside. Nothing was ransacked, nothing missing except for one thing. Liam's work computer tower. Not the TV, not the jewelry, not the cash in the drawer, just the hard drive. The officers looked puzzled. One of them asked if Liam had enemies, debts, anything on that machine someone might want. Liam didn't. It was just spreadsheets, project notes, and financial logs. Nothing worth a break-in like that. I tried to show them the footage, but the cloud file was corrupted. The local backup gone. The drive the camera stored to had been physically removed from the network hub. Whoever he was, he'd known exactly what to take to erase himself. The cops shrugged. Probably a burglary gone wrong, one said. But I knew better. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. The next few days blurred together. Liam refused to go back to the house. I couldn't even drive by it. When we finally did, in daylight, everything looked normal, too normal. The small squares of mortar near the door were perfectly replaced, smooth, as if the damage had never existed. The scratches were gone. But when I crouched down, I noticed something new. A faint discoloration, a slight greenish hue, still clinging to the edges of the brick. Whatever he'd used had sunk deep. Liam said it best in a whisper I'll never forget. He wasn't stealing, he was testing. A week later, Sarah called again. She had dug deeper, tracing the delivery records from that day. There was no Amazon driver matching his description. The van wasn't registered to any delivery service, no plates, no tracking. It was a ghost vehicle. And then she said something that made my skin crawl. There have been at least 3 similar incidents within 100 miles of you over the last year. Each one started with odd delivery behavior, pauses, then mysterious markings. The homes weren't robbed. The people inside moved out. Some even changed states, but the houses themselves all went up for sale within 2 months. The agent said potential buyers complained of strange noises from inside the walls. I felt sick. One night, about a month later, I couldn't help myself. I pulled up the old footage I'd managed to recover scraps saved in my phone's cache. They weren't full videos anymore, just flickering fragments. In one, the driver stood frozen in that now familiar stance, staring up at our bedroom window. But this time, as I scrubbed through the footage frame by frame, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A faint reflection in the lens of his sunglasses. Not the house. A person, someone standing behind him. The figure was just a blur, pale and indistinct, but unmistakably human. Not in our yard closer, almost overlapping with his shoulder. Like someone invisible had been standing just out of frame the entire time. I replayed it again and again, but the reflection never changed. Always there, always in the same position. That's when I realized the driver wasn't alone. He was working with someone or something that didn't show up unless it wanted to. We never went back to that house. Sold it within weeks. Every time I see a delivery van now, I feel my throat tighten. I can't walk up to a front door without thinking of that quiet, careful man counting under his breath, drawing those invisible lines. I still have one clip saved on my laptop, the only one that never corrupted. It's just 10 seconds long. The front porch at dusk, the faint hum of cicadas, nothing moving. Then, for a single frame, something flickers near the corner of the door, a shape like a hand pressing gently against the wood from the inside. I've shown it to tech experts, friends, anyone who'll look. They all say it's compression noise, a glitch, digital artifacting. But I know what I saw. It was a gloved hand, and it wasn't mine. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that same soft chime from the app on my phone. Motion detected at front door. Only, I don't live in that house anymore. I don't even have a doorbell camera connected to my account. Yet the feed still plays just static at first. Then the faint shape of a man standing on a porch that isn't mine. He lifts his head slowly, like he knows I'm watching. And every time, I hear that low, mechanical hum again. The sound of the saw, starting up in the dark. The house was enormous, one of those sprawling faux Tuscan nightmares in a wealthy, secluded cul-de-sac called Deer Creek Estates. I was house-sitting for the winters, an older, eccentric couple who had decamped to the Riviera for 3 months. I was a broke college student named Mark, and the pay was ridiculous. All I had to do was water the plants, keep the lights on a rotating schedule, and, most importantly, abide by their single, non-negotiable rule: never answer the door after sundown. Our system is very sophisticated, Mark, Mrs. Winters had told me, her eyes wide with a manic intensity. If you must communicate, use the doorbell camera's two-way speaker. Do not, under any circumstances, unlock the door after dark. It's for your own safety. They didn't elaborate. They just left. and I was alone in a house the size of a small museum, surrounded by complex security systems I didn't fully understand. The doorbell camera, a sleek, black circle next to the wrought iron security door, was my only interaction point with the outside world. For the first 2 weeks, it was the usual monotony. Amazon deliveries, the weekly lawn service, and an occasional lost jogger. It was a well-paid vacation, and the camera was the proof of my peace. Then came the first notification, 3 weeks into my stay. It was 11:34 p.m. I was watching a movie in the media room, the sound low. The chime on my phone was quiet, but it made me jump. Motion detected at front door. I paused the movie and opened the app. The feed showed the small, illuminated area of the porch. It was pouring rain, the downpour turning the video feed into a grainy, flickering landscape. Standing directly in front of the door was a person. Their face was obscured by a heavy, dark-hooded rain slicker, and they weren't moving. They weren't ringing the bell or knocking. They were just standing there, absolutely still, their form vague and bulky in the low light. Curiosity warred with the specific dread of the winter's rule. I stared at the feed for nearly a full minute. The person was completely silent, completely static. The only sounds were the rain hitting the porch awning and the low hum of the camera's night vision. Then, the person bent down slowly, with a deliberate, theatrical motion. They placed something on the edge of the welcome mat. It was a small object, wrapped in bright blue foil paper and tied with a cheap silver ribbon, a pathetic, water-sogged gift. Without ever looking up or looking towards the camera, the figure straightened up, turned, and walked quickly away, disappearing back into the relentless downpour. I didn't open the door. I didn't say anything into the speaker. I just watched the clip over and over. It was unnerving, but not threatening, yet. The next morning, the sun was out, and the gift sat on the mat, looking absurdly out of place. It was soaking wet. I retrieved it with a dish towel. It was a novelty snow globe, the kind you buy at an airport gift shop, with fake glitter snow and a plastic cartoon bear inside. It had cost maybe $5. I immediately called my sister, Chloe, the overreactor. "Some weirdo left a soaking wet snow globe on the porch last night," I told her, trying to sound nonchalant. "Oh my God, Mark, that is so creepy. Someone is casing the joint, testing the waters. They probably have a tracker in the snow globe. Call the police immediately," she shrieked down the phone. Then I called my friend Joel, the skeptic. He was far more measured. "A snow globe? At 11:30 p.m.? Yeah. It's weird, but it's not a threat. It's probably a prank. Someone's buddy lost a bet. It's a ritualistic joke. Just toss it." I took Joel's advice. I tossed the snow globe. I tried to convince myself it was a one-off oddity, a piece of urban strangeness. But the feeling of uncertainty lingered, heavy and cold. The person hadn't made a sound. They hadn't attempted to interact. They simply deposited the item. It felt less like a prank and more like a psychological test. A week later, I got another notification. 11:47 p.m. This time, the person was shorter, wearing a different, faded gray trench coat. The weather was clear. The procedure was identical. They stood, completely motionless, for about 40 seconds. Then, they bent down, placed the item this time, a child's worn red rain boot, single on the mat, and walked away. The feeling of being watched, of being subject to a bizarre, silent ritual, intensified. It wasn't the material of the gifts that scared me. It was the sheer, terrifying consistency of the performance. Two different people, same time, same silence, same ritualistic placement of useless junk. They were marking their territory, and the doorbell camera, my digital guardian, was merely a silent, unblinking witness to their escalating strangeness. I was starting to believe Chloe. This wasn't a prank. It was a pattern. A cold, deliberate pattern. The rain boot was thrown into the trash, but the memory wasn't so easy to dispose of. The rule was clear. Never answer the door after sundown. But the gifts weren't asking for entry. They were being left as an unsolicited, cryptic offering. They were bypassing the physical security of the lock and attacking the psychological security of my solitude. I called the Winters, but they were sailing somewhere off the coast of Italy, and the woman who answered their emergency line was entirely unhelpful, stating only that I should strictly adhere to the home's security protocols. The third incident happened on a Saturday night. I was trying to relax, trying to convince myself that Joel was right and that I was simply a victim of a bizarre, ongoing college hazing ritual. 12:05 a.m. motion detected at front door. I snatched my phone. This person was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a cheap, white plastic Halloween mask, the kind with a vague, unsettling smile. They were wearing a dark jacket, and their shoulders were slightly hunched. This time, the ritual changed. The figure stood for the usual length of time, about 30 seconds, but instead of immediately bending down, they raised a small, square device to the level of their chest. It looked like an old cassette recorder. Then, they played something. The sound that came through the camera's microphone was instantly, horribly recognizable. It was a recording of me. Not a recording of me talking on the phone, or a song I was playing. It was a recording of my internal life. It was a recording of my deep, rhythmic, sleeping breath. The sound was amplified, distorted by the poor quality camera microphone, but undeniably, horrifically, my breath. The quiet, repetitive rhythm was punctuated by a sound I made, sometimes a soft, nervous clearing of my throat right before I fully woke up. I knew that sound because I had heard it every morning for the last month. They had recorded me while I was asleep in the house. The fear was absolute, a cold spike of adrenaline. This wasn't a random weirdo. This was a targeted surveillance. They had been close enough to record me through the walls, perhaps placing a listening device near a window or vent, or they had been inside the house at some point. The gifts hadn't been an attempt to open the door. They were psychological warfare, a form of signaling that they could access the most vulnerable part of my life, my unconscious state. The masked figure played the recording for 15 seconds. Then, they lowered the device, placed a final gift, a single, dead, desiccated rose on the mat, and walked away. I scrambled to the window, pulling the heavy velvet curtains aside. The street was empty. The sound of my own sleeping breath, now off the recording but echoing in my mind, was suffocating. I felt utterly violated, not by physical touch, but by an intimate, calculated trespass. I had been watched not just by the camera, but by the people who knew the camera was watching them. I called Joel again, the skeptic. He had to believe me now. Joel. They left a gift, but this time they played a recording of me sleeping. I heard my own breathing on the doorbell cam. There was a silence on the line. Then, Joel's voice came through, subdued, a thread of genuine terror replacing his usual skepticism. "Mark, that's not a prank. That's a deep dive. They know what kind of security you have, and they're showing you they know where you are, even when you're asleep." "What do I do? They're coming back." "You're the house sitter, Mark. You're supposed to be in control of the security," Joel said, the hesitation and the guilt of his previous dismissals heavy in his tone. "The door is locked, right? The system is armed?" "Yes, but I feel like they're just showing me the locks are useless." "They haven't tried to enter yet," Joel pointed out, trying to find a footing in logic. "But they will. They're ramping up to the climax. They're making you panic so you'll make a mistake. Don't engage. Don't open the door. Don't talk into the camera. Just treat them like an outside weather event." I hung up, the advice useless. How could I treat this like an outside event when my own breath was the sound of the threat? The guilt of being unable to protect the house and myself from this slow, psychological bleed was crushing. I started to check the house, every window, every closet, every air vent. I pulled the furniture away from the walls, frantically searching for listening devices. The house was too big, too complex. I was exhausted, the adrenaline surge giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. Around 3:30 a.m., I finally crashed on the couch in the media room, the doorbell camera feed playing on the laptop in front of me. I had armed the system, double-locked the security door, and placed a chair beneath the handle for good measure. I thought I was safe, but I had forgotten one thing about the winter's sophisticated security. At 4:05 a.m., the camera notification woke me instantly. Motion detected at front door. The figure was back. Same height as the first one, wearing the bulky rain slicker again. But the demeanor was different. There was no hesitation, no standing still. This was the survival phase, the final, violent action. The figure didn't stop at the mat. It walked right up to the heavy, black, wrought iron security door, and without a sound, it produced a small, silver object. The camera feed showed it clearly. A set of lockpicks, held with a professional, casual grip. And then, the audio played again, but it wasn't my breathing this time. It was a low, clear, synthesized voice, speaking through the figure's chest-mounted device. The voice was calm, neutral, and terrifyingly clear. "We know your schedule, Mark. We know your fear. We know the security code for the kitchen window. The owner's system is good, but it has a single flaw. The microphone. They rely on it for the final command." The figure stopped fiddling with the lock, and the voice continued. "To disarm the full house system, they use a single voice-activated word. It's a command that the microphone is listening for all the time." My blood ran cold. The Winters had never told me the code. They simply said, "Don't talk to them." But the camera was my only means of communication. The final, terrifying twist. "The command is simple, Mark," the voice said, the calm tone feeling like a physical violation. "It is the sound of absolute panic. It is your scream." And then, the figure began to apply pressure to the lockpicks, the metal scratching against the cylinder. I knew they were bluffing, that the house could not be disarmed by a simple scream. But I also knew my voice was locked in my throat, a thick knot of pure terror. The figure was counting on my panic, on my absolute paralysis, to finish the job. The man was right about one thing. The camera's microphone was always on, listening. And the final step in their terrifying, psychological scheme was to use my own inevitable, raw, human reaction to unlock the door for them. The panic was absolute. I was trapped, frozen in the media room, staring at the feet of the man picking the lock and listening to the calm, calculated voice inviting me to scream for my own destruction. The house I lived in was unremarkable, a mid-century ranch in a working-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. I was a young accountant named Daniel, and my girlfriend Clara, the calm thinker, and I had just bought the place. We installed the doorbell camera more out of suburban habit than actual fear. It was summer 2019, and the days were endless, hot, and utterly ordinary. The first hint of strangeness wasn't a clip of a person, but an object. It was a Monday morning. I checked the camera feed before leaving for work, just a quick scroll through the night's motion history. Around 3:40 a.m., the feed showed a flash of motion, but it was too fast to identify a person. The resulting still image, however, was chillingly clear. Someone had left a small, neatly arranged pile of children's sidewalk chalk on our welcome mat. The chalk wasn't in a box or a bag. It was about 10 short sticks, a mix of bright primary colors set down like a tiny, sacrificial offering. No note, no footprint, and no visible person in the frame. The chalk had just appeared. I picked it up on my way out. It felt unnervingly cold and clean. I mentioned it to Clara later that night. She was practical, the kind of person who always looked for the simplest explanation. A kid probably dropped their bag while riding their bike home late, and the wind blew the chalk towards the mat, she suggested, as she folded laundry. Or a teenager playing a stupid prank. Don't overthink it, Dan. I was the skeptic in our relationship, so I agreed with her. It was a one-off, just chalk. I tossed it in the garage. A week passed. Then, the next incident. 3:55 a.m. motion detected at front door. This time, the motion was clearer. A small, crouched figure, low to the ground, moving incredibly fast, like a feral animal. The figure only appeared for a fraction of a second before darting out of frame. But what they left behind was undeniable. Drawn in bright, thick, yellow chalk on the black pavement of our driveway, directly beneath the camera's view, was a symbol. It was a crude, unevenly drawn circle, bisected by a sharp, jagged line. A symbol that looked like a child's attempt at a target or a broken sundae. I showed Clara the footage the next morning. Now, even her calm veneer was showing cracks. "Okay, that's weird, Dan," she admitted, running a cloth over the drawing. "It's clearly deliberate. The time is the same, and now there's a drawing. But it's still just chalk. It's like a neighborhood dare. But the figure was so fast, Clara, and the chalk wasn't here yesterday. Someone is coming on our property in the dead of night and drawing a target on our driveway." I started digging. I posted the chalk symbol on a local neighborhood forum. The responses were a mix of kids being kids and satanic cults are active in the area. But one message, sent privately, made my heart stop. It was from a user named Old Vern. The message was brief and written in fragmented, unnerving caps. It is the sign of the Watcher. They are measuring the silence. Wipe it away. Never let it dry. If they draw it 3 times, it is too late. I felt the persistent fear of not being trusted by the police if I called. So, I decided to trust old Vern. I immediately scrubbed the chalk off the driveway with a hose and a wire brush. The chalk, however, was stubbornly thick. I managed to get the bulk of it, but a faint, yellowish residue remained, a ghost of the broken sun symbol. 2 days later, the fear of being watched became a chilling reality. The camera notification came at 8 p.m., while Clara and I were watching TV. It was still daylight, but the evening sun was starting to cast long shadows. This time, it wasn't a shadow or a quick dash. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7, wearing a faded pink dress and holding a handful of chalk. She walked up to our driveway, completely unhurried, like she was walking up to her own house. She went straight to the faint, residual chalk mark I had scrubbed. She bent down, dipped one of her sticks of chalk into a small plastic bucket of water she carried, and began to redraw the symbol. This time, the circle was perfectly even, the bisecting line straight and sharp. She was doing a professional job, and as she drew, she looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were large, dark, and utterly devoid of childhood innocence. They were the blank, cold eyes of a focused adult. The unsettling part wasn't the drawing. It was the fact that she was doing it in broad daylight, showing me she was completely unconcerned about being seen. Then, a voice came through the camera speaker, a woman's voice, soft and calming, like a kindergarten teacher. "Oh, sweetie, you missed a spot. A little further to the left, darling. The circle must connect." The girl followed the instruction, corrected the curve of the circle, and then, slowly, she smiled at the camera. It was a wide, awful, empty smile. The psychological element of using a child as the point of escalation was a masterstroke of horror. It twisted the fear of intrusion into a horrifying, sickening guilt. Who would call the police on a little girl? Who would yell at a child? The fear intensified into a deep, moral uncertainty. Clara, the calm thinker, was now the overreactor. She threw a cushion across the room, adrenaline surging through her. "That's enough. That's not a prank. That's someone using a child as a human shield for surveillance. We're calling the police right now." But the girl was already gone, running off the driveway, her plastic bucket swinging. I stopped her. "Wait, Clara. The police will talk to the girl. They'll call social services, and they'll never find the woman. She'll get away with it, and the chalk will still be here. They want us to panic. They want us to make a big, loud scene. We need to think." But the chilling sight of the girl's blank, focused eyes and the perfectly drawn circle, staring up at the darkening sky, had already begun to infect my reflection. I felt the profound shame of knowing a little girl had been used to terrorize me, and the paralyzing fear of what the woman, the one who spoke with such a soothing, terrifying calm, would do next. The target was complete. The silence had been measured, and I knew the third and final drawing would not be made of chalk. The perfectly drawn chalk symbol, the broken sun stared up from the driveway, a finished signature on a contract I never signed. The psychological violation was complete. They had breached the barrier of night, used a child, and spoke directly into the camera, showing they knew I was watching. They were signaling that the time for surveillance was over, and the time for action was next. Clara and I spent the evening in a state of high alert panic, every shadow outside our window making us jump. We triple-checked the locks, armed a motion sensor alarms, and I kept my hand near the heavy baseball bat I'd placed next to the couch. We were trapped in a state of siege, waiting for the climax that the chalk drawing had promised. We never heard from old Vern again. His one cryptic warning was all the information I had, and the final line echoed in my mind. If they draw it 3 times, it is too late. They had only drawn it twice so far, the faint yellow residue and the clear, final circle. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I finally got up, walked to the kitchen, and pulled up the live feed on my phone. The driveway was dark and silent. The chalk symbol was a white stain in the deep black of the night vision. I watched for 30 minutes. Nothing. The silence was absolute, a heavy, waiting quiet that felt worse than any noise. I started to let the tension seep out of my shoulders, the exhaustion winning out over the adrenaline. Then, the camera notification flashed again. 2:38 a.m. Motion detected at front door. It wasn't a sudden blur or a crouched shadow. It was the woman. She was older, tall and thin, wearing sensible walking shoes and a dark cardigan. She walked up the driveway with the same unnerving, calm composure as the little girl. She carried no bag, no chalk, and no tools. She wore a blank expression, utterly mundane, like a neighbor coming to drop off a casserole. She stopped at the chalk symbol. She looked down at it, an expression of clinical satisfaction on her face. She raised her head, looked directly into the camera's lens, and gave a faint, chilling, knowing nod. Then she bent down, and the final drawing began. She wasn't holding anything in her hands. She was using something far more visceral, far more terrifying. The motion was slow, deliberate. She placed her right hand flat on the pavement, inside the perfectly drawn chalk circle. Then she dragged her hand across the driveway, leaving a third mark, a single, thick, dark, wet line that ran from the center of the chalk circle to the edge of the welcome mat. The line was a perfect, dark contrast to the white chalk. I didn't need to see the color in the night vision to know what it was. It was blood. The horror wasn't in the blood itself, but in the casual, methodical way it was used. It wasn't spilled. It was drawn. The woman then stood up, pulled a simple white cloth from her pocket, and wiped her palm clean, the action utterly fastidious and calm. The third line was complete, and she had used herself as the medium. A paralyzing coldness hit me. I heard the woman's voice again, amplified, but only a whisper this time. It was not coming from the camera speaker, but from somewhere inside the house. The silence has been measured. The mark is complete. Welcome, watcher. The bloodline was the climax. The final, undeniable act of intrusion. It wasn't a threat of violence to me. It was the symbolic violence of self-mutilation to achieve a greater goal, the breaking of the final, psychological barrier. The fear transformed into a survival instinct. I ran to the bedroom, screaming for Clara to wake up. "It's the third mark! It's blood! She's inside!" Clara, now fully awake and terrified, was no longer the calm thinker. She was raw, panic. She grabbed the phone, looked at the feed showing the dark line leading from the chalk to the door, and then looked around the dark, silent bedroom. "The motion sensor!" she shrieked. "It didn't go off. They bypassed the door. Look at the camera, Daniel. Look at the camera." I looked back at the live feed. The woman was gone. The dark bloodline was the only thing left. But then, I saw the final, chilling detail. The camera's wide-angle lens showed the entire porch. And now, taped to the small, curved dome of the doorbell camera, perfectly centered over the lens, was a single, tiny, white slip of paper. It looked like a small, folded note. I knew I had to go to the door. Not to open it, but to see what they had done. I grabbed the bat and moved slowly, cautiously, toward the front of the house. I reached the security door, heart hammering in my chest. The door was locked. The alarm panel was armed. I looked through the tiny peephole. The porch was empty. I slowly unlocked the security door and opened it a crack. The chalk was there. The blood was there. I stepped out, bat held tight, and looked up at the camera. Taped over the lens was a small, white piece of paper. I pulled it off with a shaking hand. It was a small, handwritten note. The handwriting was neat, elegant, and familiar. It was the same handwriting that the old Vern private message had been in. The note simply said, "The silence is measured in minutes. 15. I felt the persistent fear of not knowing, of being caught in a final, horrifying countdown. I looked at the dark, dried blood trail, connecting the symbol to my door. They had come and gone without setting off the alarm. A psychological ghost. I had 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Until the culmination of the chalk drawings, the recorded silences, and the drawn blood. I didn't know if the chalk mark was a symbol of a break-in, a hostage situation, or a final, devastating mental attack. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to spend the final minutes of this horrifying ordeal watching an empty porch. I grabbed Clara, my keys, and the baseball bat. We sprinted out the back door, leaving the house, the chalk, the blood, and the awful unanswered countdown behind us. The terror of the unanswered question, what happens at the 15-minute mark, haunted us more than any monster ever could. The final, silent act was not what they did to my house, but what they did to my peace of mind.